The photograph is dated 1890, printed in faint sepia ink, its caption, matter of fact. Cathedral Square, early morning. The location is unmistakable, a European city centre designed for tens of thousands. The architecture towers skyward, stone vaults, ribbed arches, facades carved with impossible precision. And yet the square is empty. No carts, no crowds, no builders, no scaffolding. The exposure excuse falters here. Shop signs are crisp, shadows are short, flags hang still. The city appears finished but uninhabited. In the archive ledger beside it, a census note from the same decade records a sudden population increase, tens of thousands appearing within a single reporting cycle. No migration source listed, no construction workforce documented. A completed civilization followed by its population. If these cathedrals were built by people, where are they? And if they were not, what happened before the people arrived? The accepted story is elegant in its simplicity. Between the 12th and 19th centuries, human hands, stonemasons, guilds, and devout communities raised the great cathedrals of Europe and beyond. Generations labored, faith supplied patience, time did the rest. Guidebooks repeat the same phrasing built over centuries. Construction timelines stretch conveniently across gaps in documentation. Yet when original municipal building records are examined for Paris, Cologne and Milan, something strange emerges. There are completion dates, consecration ceremonies and repair budgets, but surprisingly few detailed logs describing large-scale initial construction. The Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Paris offers a representative example. Official histories date its construction from 1163 to 1345, nearly 2 centuries of continuous work. Yet the earliest detailed maintenance records appear only in the late 1700s, describing repairs to existing stonework without explaining the original construction process. The Paris Municipal Archives contain exhaustive documentation of bridge repairs, road maintenance, and minor civic improvements from the medieval period. But the cathedral itself, supposedly the city's greatest achievement, exists in the records primarily as a finished fact requiring upkeep. The story works until one asks who fed, housed, and coordinated thousands of laborers for centuries without leaving proportional records. Medieval cities kept meticulous accounts of grain stores, tax revenues, and guild memberships. The paperwork exists, but where are the payroll records for cathedral workers? Where are the injury compensation claims, the dispute resolutions, the housing contracts for migrant laborers? Perhaps the records were lost, or perhaps the construction was not gradual at all. Archival city panoramas from the mid-19th century show urban cores already complete. Paris in 1852 was photographed from the towers of Notre Dame by the Bisson brothers. Prague in 1856 was captured in daguerreotypes commissioned by the Habsburg court. Vienna in 1860 was documented in the earliest systematic urban photography project. Streets were paved with geometric precision and cathedrals stood complete. Infrastructure aligned with mathematical exactitude, and it seems to anticipate populations not yet present. Yet industrial census data from the same period records explosive urban population growth after these cities appear architecturally mature. In Paris alone, population doubled between 1850 and 1870 from 1 million to 2 million, with no corresponding spike in construction permits for major civic structures. The grand boulevards photographed by Charles Marville in the 1860s appear finished, awaiting the crowds that would soon fill them. The sewer systems, the monumental public buildings, the symmetrical parks, all photographed as complete before the population surge that supposedly necessitated them. London tells the same story, Photographs from the 1850s show vast stretches of monumental architecture. The British Museum, St. Paul's Cathedral, the bridges spanning the Thames, all finished, while census records show the population explosion still building. The infrastructure precedes the need. Why would cities build for populations that had not yet arrived? Urban foresight is plausible. Civic planners certainly considered future growth, but foresight does not explain perfection without presence. It does not explain why the grandest structures appear first, while basic housing remains inadequate for decades afterward. The sequence troubles the official narrative. The infrastructure appears, complete and waiting. Then the inhabitants follow. When pressed, official histories invoke a buffer. Officials argued work slowed during plague years, records were lost in fires, renovations obscured earlier phases. The explanations sound reasonable until examined against the documentary evidence that did survive. Renovation documents exist, detailed, itemized, meticulous. Cathedral maintenance records from the 19th century specify repairs to specific stones, replacement of worn carvings, costs for scaffolding, rental measured in daily rates. In Cologne, the cathedral's 19th century renovation records fill entire archive rooms. Ledgers note the cost of each replacement finial, the wages paid to individual stone carvers, even the expense of housing supervisors during the restoration work that began in 1842. The accountants tracked everything with German precision. Yet these same archives contain almost nothing about the cathedral's supposed medieval construction period. The building simply exists in the records as a fact requiring maintenance. The pattern repeats across Europe. Canterbury Cathedral's records describe repairs dating back centuries, but the foundational construction documents are conspicuously absent. The Duomo in Milan has exhaustive records of its 19th century completion of the facade, but the earlier construction phases exist primarily in legend and later chronicles written centuries after the supposed events. Why do repair records survive in such abundance while foundational construction records vanish? If medieval record-keeping was too primitive to document construction, how did it become sophisticated enough to document repairs? The asymmetry becomes the first hairline crack. Absence is not evidence unless it repeats, and here it does. Across Europe, the pattern holds comprehensive maintenance documentation for structures whose origins remain conveniently vague. The cities remember how to fix what they cannot remember building. Someone knew these structures well enough to maintain them, but not well enough to explain where they came from. Construction photography becomes widespread by the late 19th century. The technology arrives precisely when major infrastructure projects multiply across industrializing nations. Engineers want proof of progress. Investors demand visual documentation. Newspapers publish construction photographs to demonstrate civic advancement. The result is thousands upon thousands of images showing bridges under assembly, factories mid-construction, railways being laid, every phase documented with obsessive detail. The Brooklyn Bridge construction from 1869 to 1883 was photographed extensively. Images show the caissons being sunk, the towers rising course by course, the cables being strung. The Eiffel Tower construction from 1887 to 1889 was similarly documented in sequential photographs showing the iron framework ascending stage by stage. These were monuments to progress, and progress required documentation. Yet for cathedrals supposedly under construction during this same period, images overwhelmingly show them already complete. Notre Dame appears finished in every photograph from the 1850s onward, no scaffolding, no construction materials, no work crews. The Duomo in Milan stands intact in images from 1865, despite official claims that major work continued until 1892. The Cathedral of Cologne, supposedly completed in 1880 after centuries of construction, appears finished in photographs from the 1850s. Where are the transitional phases? Stone vaults appear whole across continents without photographic buildup. The construction process that supposedly took centuries left no visual trace during the precise historical window when construction photography became ubiquitous. Perhaps photographers preferred finished beauty, or perhaps there was nothing to photograph in between. The documentation obsession of the industrial age somehow skipped over the greatest construction projects supposedly underway. Sacré-Cœur in Paris, begun in 1875, has construction photographs. But older cathedrals supposedly still being completed remain silent. The absence in the photographic record becomes its own kind of evidence. What was not photographed might never have happened. Modern engineers examining cathedral stonework note tolerances measured in millimeters and uniformity across vast surfaces carved without CNC tooling. The nave ceiling of Chartres Cathedral displays curvature consistent to within 2 millimeters across hundreds of individual stones. Each rib vault meets its neighbor with precision that would challenge laser-guided equipment. The acoustic properties of these spaces suggest mathematical modeling of sound propagation, knowledge supposedly unavailable to medieval builders. A 2017 structural analysis of Notre Dame, conducted before the 2019 fire, revealed that the flying buttresses transfer loads with an efficiency that suggests computer-aided structural analysis. The stones are positioned to handle stress in ways that should not be possible without understanding material physics. Yet the official explanation relies on hand chisels, rope pulleys, and candlelight. Skill explains much. A master craftsman can achieve remarkable precision through experience and intuition. But uniformity across civilizations suggests systems, not artisans. The same architectural proportions appear in Moscow's St. Basil's Cathedral, Manila's San Agustin Church, and Buenos Aires Metropolitan Cathedral. These are cities supposedly built by unrelated cultures using different measurement systems, separated by oceans and decades. The golden ratio, 1.618, appears embedded in structures across continents. The height-to-width ratios match, the dome curvatures align, the acoustic resonance frequencies repeat, either knowledge diffused impossibly fast across pre-telegraph civilizations, or the structures share a common origin that predates the cultures claiming them. Renaissance architects studied Roman ruins and revived classical proportions. This is documented. But the architectural signatures appear in places Rome never reached, built by cultures with no recorded contact with European traditions. The mathematics transcends the supposed builders. When modern archaeoastronomers analyze cathedral alignments, they find precision that requires instruments not invented until centuries after construction. The buildings encode knowledge their builders supposedly did not possess, unless the builders were not who we think they were. Foundling hospital records show a surge in the late 1800s with numbers that defy standard explanations. In France, intake numbers at Hôpital des Enfants Trouves tripled between 1850 and 1870. The registers record thousands of infants and children delivered through the hospital's rotating cylindrical window, a device allowing anonymous abandonment. The intake forms repeat the same notation: origin unknown, parents deceased. In Russia, Moscow orphanages report unprecedented capacity strain during the same period. St. Petersburg foundling institutions expand rapidly to accommodate numbers that exceed what war, famine, or epidemic would normally produce. The logs keep the same sparse notation: no surnames, no birthplaces, no family histories. In the United States, the orphan train system begins in 1854, eventually relocating over 250,000 children westward over 7 decades. The Children's Aid Society, founded by Charles Loring Brace, describes rescuing children from urban poverty, yet the numbers grow faster than urban growth itself. Photographs from the orphan train era show hundreds of children lined up at stations, waiting to be selected by farm families. Clean, healthy-looking children whose origins are recorded only as New York foundling or as brought to the society under unknown circumstances. At the same time, cities absorb populations seemingly from nowhere. Census reports document the numbers but rarely the sources. Chicago's population grows from 30,000 in 1850 to 1.7 million in 1900, but immigration records account for only a portion of this growth. San Francisco, Melbourne, and Buenos Aires all show similar patterns: explosive growth with incomplete source documentation. Industrial upheaval displaces families, certainly. Urbanization draws people from rural areas, but displacement still leaves origins, migration still leaves trails, ship manifests, property sales, relocation permits. These children had to come from somewhere. The records insist they came from nowhere, and someone needed to fill the empty cities. The timing of orphan surges coincides precisely with urban infrastructure appearing before urban populations, as if the cities were prepared, waiting for inhabitants, and the orphans arrived to fill them. By 1893, the Chicago World's Fair unveiled monumental architecture that seems to defy its own timeline. The Court of Honor, a complex of palaces, domes, and colonnades designed to showcase American progress, was allegedly built in under 2 years on swampland that required extensive foundation work. The official narrative describes an army of workers constructing elaborate buildings at impossible speed. Officially, temporary. Photographically indistinguishable from permanent stone. The administration building, designed by Richard Morris Hunt, featured a dome rivaling the US Capitol. The Manufactures and Liberal Arts building covered over 30 acres under a single roof, the largest building in the world at the time. The Palace of Fine Arts, the Electricity Building, and the Transportation Building with its golden door were all constructed with architectural sophistication that made European capitals envious. Staff buildings, exhibition halls, the Grand Basin with its fountains and sculptures were all constructed with a speed that makes cathedral construction timelines look glacial. Frederick Law Olmsted's landscaping alone, with mature trees, sculpted grounds, lagoons, and bridges, was supposedly accomplished in months, what normally requires years. Then, within months of closing, they vanish, demolished, burned, erased. The official reason is that they were built of temporary plaster and wood framing, a technique called staff, basically papier-mâché on timber frames. But photographs show no evidence of facade work or temporary materials. The surfaces appear as solid as any European palace. Why demonstrate architectural mastery exceeding European cathedrals only to destroy it? The official explanation holds that these were demonstrations of what American industry could achieve, temporary monuments to progress. Spectacle sells progress, but the destruction seems hasty, almost desperate. The buildings that survived, the Palace of Fine Arts in Chicago, required special intervention to preserve. The rest were eliminated systematically, unless the buildings were not demonstrations but leftovers. Unless they stood before the fair was conceived and the fair provided cover for their existence and their subsequent removal. The World's Fairs continue this pattern with suspicious consistency. Paris in 1889 constructs the Exposition Universelle, including the Eiffel Tower, one of the few permanent structures allowed. Buffalo in 1901 builds the Pan American Exposition, featuring the Electric Tower and elaborate exhibition palaces. St. Louis in 1904 creates the Louisiana Purchase Exposition, covering over 1,200 acres with monumental buildings. Each time, monumental structures appear with implausible speed each time they are demolished afterward. The official explanation holds that these were elaborate stage sets, plaster over wooden frames, meant to dazzle briefly and disappear. Yet engineering reports describe foundations designed for permanence, steel frameworks built to last, and electrical systems sophisticated enough to power entire cities. The 1904 St. Louis Fair required its own power plant, a permanent installation generating electricity for structures supposedly temporary. The Palace of Machinery alone required foundations supporting hundreds of tons of industrial equipment. Temporary buildings do not need such infrastructure. The photographs show what appears to be solid masonry construction, cornices, columns, sculptural details that seem impossible to execute in staff material within the construction timeframes claimed. The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco raised elaborate buildings allegedly in months, then demolished them all except for the Palace of Fine Arts, which survived through public outcry. The pattern repeats: build rapidly, display briefly, destroy thoroughly. Between 1876 and 1916, World's Fairs constructed and destroyed more monumental architecture than had been built in previous centuries. Why? Perhaps to demonstrate modernity's capabilities, to show that industrial civilization could accomplish in months what medieval societies required centuries to achieve. The fairs were progress propaganda after all, or perhaps to erase evidence that did not fit the narrative. Maybe these structures already existed, were repurposed for exhibitions, and then had to be removed because their existence contradicted the official timeline of architectural development. The demolished buildings could tell no contradictory stories. Their foundations were buried, their materials scattered. Only the photographs remain, and photographs can be explained away as depicting temporary marvels. From Moscow to Manila, from Paris to Buenos Aires, architectural motifs repeat with unsettling precision. Star-shaped fortifications surrounding cities that trace Italian design appear simultaneously across continents in the 1500s and the 1600s. Each fort follows the same geometric principles: angular bastions designed to eliminate defensive blind spots, walls angled to deflect cannon fire, interior courtyards with identical proportions. The official explanation invokes military engineers sharing knowledge across European courts. But the fortifications appear in places beyond European contact. Star forts appear in Japan, in India, and in the pre-colonial Americas. The same geometric signature was deployed globally, as if from a single blueprint. Domed structures with identical proportions appear worldwide. The Pantheon in Rome, with its perfect hemispherical dome, establishes a ratio that repeats in Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and the US Capitol in Washington. The mathematics match across centuries and cultures. The dome diameter to height ratios align, and the acoustic properties mirror each other. Vaulted public halls with the same dimensions appear in city centers globally. Railway stations, market halls, and exhibition spaces all share structural principles that seem coordinated rather than coincidentally developed. Grand Central Terminal in New York, St. Pancras Station in London, and the Galeries Royal Saint-Hubert in Brussels have proportions that echo each other too precisely to be independent invention. Built supposedly by unrelated cultures separated by oceans and centuries, yet sharing mathematical proportions to that degree. The Baroque style appears simultaneously across continents in the 1600s. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, the Palace of Versailles in France, the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, and colonial churches in Mexico and Peru all manifest the same architectural language within decades of each other. The usual explanation invokes cultural exchange, trade routes, and traveling architects. But the timing troubles this theory. Ships took months to cross oceans. Knowledge transfer was slow and dependent on physical travel and direct observation. Yet the architectural signature appears everywhere at once, as if deployed rather than developed. Cultural diffusion explains similarity, but diffusion requires time, migration, and documentation of transmission. Here the style predates the supposed carriers. The buildings arrived before the builders could have. Sewers, aqueducts, subterranean tunnel systems appear beneath cities whose populations allegedly arrived later. Paris's underground network stretches for over 2,000 kilometers, an infrastructure scaled for millions, photographed as complete in the 1860s when the city housed half that number. Eugene Belgrand's surveys conducted during the Second Empire modernization describe mapping existing systems, not constructing new ones. The documentation language reveals the assumption these systems already existed and required incorporation into city planning. Municipal documents from the era describe maintenance schedules, repair costs, cleaning rotations, no construction contracts, no excavation permits, no worker casualty reports from the massive underground construction that supposedly occurred. Roman sewers in cities like London and Paris get credited for some tunnels, but the networks extend far beyond what Roman engineering could have accomplished with documented technology, and they appear in cities Rome never occupied. Moscow's underground rivers, over 150 kilometers of tunnels directing water beneath the city, exist in municipal records as facts requiring management, not as projects requiring construction. When the Moscow metro began excavation in the 1930s, workers repeatedly encountered existing tunnel systems of unknown origin. Soviet engineers documented ancient passages that predated Russian habitation of the region. Who built infrastructure for a population that had not arrived yet? The official explanation invokes foresight, city planners preparing for growth. But 19th century bureaucracies barely managed present needs, let alone future ones. Urban planning as a systematic discipline did not emerge until the late 19th century, yet the infrastructure it supposedly planned already existed. And the systems show no evidence of gradual expansion. They appear whole, integrated, designed as unified networks rather than accumulated additions. Modern urban infrastructure grows incrementally. New lines are added to old systems, capacity is expanded as needed. But these older systems show geometric precision and integrated design suggesting single-phase construction. They work as systems, not as accumulated patches. Someone maintained systems they did not build. Maintenance records confirm this. Inherited infrastructure is common. Modern cities use Roman aqueducts, medieval bridges, ancient roads. But inheritance implies predecessors the census never recorded, predecessors who built for populations that did not yet exist, then vanished before those populations arrived. Between 1800 and 1900, global census figures stabilize after explosive growth that defies migration patterns. Cities double in population within decades, yet passenger ship manifests do not account for the numbers. Immigration records do exist, and Ellis Island processed 12 million people between 1892 and 1954, and those records are meticulous. But that does not explain the populations already present in San Francisco, Melbourne, and Buenos Aires, cities that appear demographically mature in census data before significant recorded immigration. San Francisco offers a clear example. In 1848, the population was approximately 1,000. In 1852, it was 36,000. The gold rush explains some of the growth, but ship records show perhaps 20,000 arrivals during that period. Where did the other 15,000 come from? Census takers recorded them, but their origins remain undocumented. By 1870, San Francisco had 150,000 residents in a city whose infrastructure, including cable cars, water systems, and grand hotels, seems to have anticipated that population. Melbourne's growth follows the same pattern. In 1851, there were 29,000 residents. By 1854, there were 123,000. The gold rush again provides a partial explanation, but the city's infrastructure appears complete before the rush begins. Photographs from the 1850s show finished streetscapes, elaborate buildings and systems designed for the population that was arriving, not the population that existed when construction supposedly occurred. During this same window, orphan trains redistributed children across continents. Foundling hospitals overflowed, and then, by 1900, the demographic chaos settles, the numbers stabilize, the cities fill. The census figures begin making sense according to normal migration and birth rate patterns. Whatever happened, it happened between 1800 and 1900. The window closes, the timing aligns too neatly. Industrialization accelerates demographics, certainly. But acceleration does not erase origins. Population growth requires sources, such as birth records, immigration documentation, and migration trails. And these populations seem to have none. They simply appear, as if placed. Census records from the early 1800s show suspiciously round numbers, cities reporting populations in neat thousands, suggesting estimation rather than actual counting. Then, suddenly, the numbers become specific, detailed, and documented, as if the population became real only when the counting became systematic, as if the people arrived when someone started paying attention. If repopulation occurred, lineage becomes unstable. Family trees may begin where records were written, not where bloodlines began. Genealogical research hits walls in the mid-19th century with frustrating consistency. Ancestry.com users encounter it repeatedly, records trail backward through the 1800s, then vanish. Birth records appear starting around 1850 in most European countries. Parish registries begin documenting baptisms, marriages, and deaths with systematic rigor. Before that, gaps, inconsistencies, missing volumes. The orphan generations had children who became grandparents, passing down no stories of origin because they possessed none. We came from the city became a sufficient answer. No ancestral villages, no immigration sagas, no stories of the old country, just presence without history. Modern genealogists classify these dead ends as brick walls, the point beyond which research cannot penetrate. The walls appear with suspicious synchronicity across family lines, across continents, across cultures, all around the same period. This threatens identity in ways both personal and collective. The documents that confirm existence also reveal its sudden beginning. People need origin stories. Cultures require foundation myths. The idea that we might be orphans on a civilizational scale, that our presence might not connect to a deep past, but rather to a deliberate placement, disrupts the narratives we use to understand ourselves, and identity resists threat. When genealogical evidence contradicts family tradition, people trust tradition. When census records show ancestors appearing from nowhere, people assume the records are incomplete. The alternative, that we are inheritors rather than descendants of builders, requires abandoning comfortable narratives of continuity. It means accepting that the cathedrals we claim our ancestors built might have stood empty, waiting for us. That the cities we inhabit might be hand-me-downs from a previous civilization we do not remember. Most choose the comfort. The documents remain ignored in basement archives. The pattern stays invisible because seeing it requires questioning foundational assumptions about history, identity, and continuity. And that questioning isolates. It places one outside consensus reality. Better to accept the official story, however improbable, than to embrace an alternative that has no community of belief to support it. Education systems, national myths, and architectural tourism reframe inheritance as achievement, not lies, but omissions. The cathedrals stand silently, indifferent to who claims them. Guidebooks describe centuries of devoted labor. Tour guides recite construction timelines with confidence. School textbooks explain medieval society through cathedral construction, the social organization, the religious devotion, the technological innovation. The buildings become evidence for the civilization that supposedly built them, and that civilization's existence becomes proof that the buildings were built as claimed. The circular logic sustains itself. No one mentions the photographic silence, the census gaps, the demographic impossibilities. No one asks why repair records outnumber construction records, why infrastructure precedes population, why architectural styles appear simultaneously across impossible distances. The questions are not forbidden, they simply do not arise. The official story satisfies because it has been repeated into truth. Museums display construction tools supposedly used to build cathedrals, including chisels, hammers, and wooden cranes. The tools become relics, validating the narrative. That these tools could not produce the precision observed in the stonework goes unmentioned. Visitors see medieval construction techniques demonstrated at historical sites and watch actors dressed as medieval masons chisel stone. The demonstrations prove the possibility, and it becomes accepted fact. The official story survives because it's simpler, because questioning it isolates, because accepting the pattern means accepting that consensus reality might be constructed. The social cost of alternative interpretation exceeds what most are willing to pay. Academics who pursue such questions find their careers stalling. Amateur researchers get dismissed as conspiracy theorists. The mechanisms of social control do not require active suppression, only marginalization. Perhaps history is not false, just incomplete. Perhaps the records tell truth through what they do not say. And perhaps incompleteness shapes belief more powerfully than fabrication ever could. A complete lie requires maintenance, consistency, active enforcement. But an incomplete truth maintains itself. The gaps become invisible because we have learned not to look for them. The buildings remain. The people inhabit them. The story satisfies. Only the archives whisper otherwise. And they require someone willing to listen. Most walk past them toward the gift shop, toward certainty, toward the comfort of belonging to a history that makes sense. The alternative, orphanhood on a civilizational scale, remains unthinkable because thinking it offers no community, no support, no validation, just isolation and the cold comfort of pattern recognition. We return to the original photograph, Cathedral Square, 1890, early morning light. The empty streets no longer feel deserted, they feel waiting. Waiting for people, waiting for stories, waiting for ownership. The architecture towers skyward with a precision no hand tools could have achieved, in timelines no workforce could have met, with resources no economy could have marshaled. The shadows fall sharp and short, proving the exposure was not long. The street signs remain crisp, the flags hang still. The city stands complete, but unpopulated. The census ledger beside it records the sudden appearance of inhabitants, origin unknown. Tens of thousands arriving within a single reporting cycle, no migration source documented, no construction workforce registered. The city was finished and then the people arrived to claim it. If these cities were inherited, not built, the implications cascade outward. Our genealogies might be shorter than we believe. Our connection to the past might be curatorial rather than biological. We might be the second act in a play whose first act was erased. What else did we inherit without knowing? What was erased to make room for us? What systems still operate beneath our feet, maintained but not understood, built by hands we never recorded? The archive closes, the photograph returns to its folder, the ledger returns to its shelf. The pattern waits in the silence between what the records show and what the textbooks claim. It waits in the photographic evidence of structures without builders, populations without origins, infrastructure without construction. It waits in the basement archives where the original documents sleep, untouched except by occasional researchers who arrive, recognize the pattern, and leave either converted or disturbed. Somewhere another researcher opens another archive. Another photograph emerges from another folder. Another census ledger reveals another population appearing from nowhere. The pattern waits to be seen again. It has always been there, patient, documented, preserved in the very records that supposedly confirm the official story. All it requires is someone willing to look at what is absent rather than what is present. Someone willing to ask not what the documents say, but what they do not say. Someone willing to see the waiting cities for what they were, empty, complete, and expecting the people who would arrive to call them home.